Imagine, imagine you are placed on a treadmill the exact moment you're born, just right out of the gate.
Yeah, just dropped right onto the belt.
Right. And the belt starts moving at this really slow, manageable walking pace. And everyone around you, I mean, your parents, your teachers, just society at large, they're all cheering you on.
Telling you, you're doing great, just keep going.
Exactly. Telling you that if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, just keeping that prescribed cadence, you are eventually going to reach this beautiful, glowing finish line called success.
It's a very seductive image, honestly. The rules are clear, the physics are predictable, and, well, the feedback loop is immediate. You just keep walking.
Just don't look down.
Right. Don't ask who built the machine, and definitely don't ask who is paying for the electricity.
But the thing is, as you get older, the person operating the machine keeps quietly turning up the speed. It goes from a leisurely walk to a jog to like an absolute dead sprint.
And then they start adding a steep incline.
Yeah, the incline. They start throwing weighted vests onto your shoulders, putting hurdles on the belt, and all the while, the people who were cheering for you, they aren't cheering anymore. They're standing on the sidelines holding clipboards.
Grading your running form.
Exactly, grading your form, and yelling that if you slip or if you stumble or if you get violently thrown off the back of the machine, well, it is 100% your own fault because you just lack the internal fortitude to run hard enough.
Which, perfectly encapsulates the defining psychological crisis of our current era. It's not just the physical exhaustion, oh, that's real. It's the moralization of that exhaustion.
Oh, man, the moralization of it.
Yeah, it's the internalization of this systemic friction as a personal moral failing.
It's the absolute definition of modern burnout for you, the listener. And that relentless punishing treadmill, and honestly, more importantly, the radical act of just hitting the emergency stop button is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive.
It's going to be a heavy one, but a really good one.
Definitely. We are exploring a highly provocative, deeply analytical series of writings titled Hachataskuplia, which translates roughly from Finnish to thought bubbles.
Yeah, written by this really fascinating guy named Juka.
Right, Beluka. He's a retired farmer, a programmer, an embedded systems engineer, and get this, a self-described anarchist.
But not like an anarchist in the sense of throwing bricks through coffee shop windows.
No, he means it in the original philosophical sense, advocating for life, peace, truth, and voluntary human cooperation over state-mandated coercion.
He brings such a fascinating interdisciplinary lens to this stuff. I mean, when you have someone who understands both the rigid mathematical logic of embedded software engineering and then also the organic, totally unpredictable realities of agricultural farming.
You get a very unique systems thinker.
Exactly. He looks at human society not as this collection of random events, but as a series of interconnected algorithms and feedback loops.
And his primary target, like the algorithm he is trying to deconstruct today, is the immense career pressure and the structural unemployment facing young people right now.
He offers a blisteringly fierce critique of modern societal norms.
He really does. And I should note for you, the listener, right up front, Juka tears into the political left, the political right, educational institutions, and corporate structures with equal ferocity. So our mission here isn't to validate his specific political alignments or endorse a side.
Right, we're not taking a political stance here.
Well, really not. Our goal is just to dissect the anatomy of his argument impartially, to understand the foundational mechanisms of why he views the world this way, and importantly, to extract his highly actionable advice on how to find fulfilling work in a system that seems designed to crush it.
And to understand his proposed escape route, we first kind of have to understand his structural analysis of the prison itself.
The architecture of the treadmill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which requires us to completely discard our conventional understanding of where career pressure actually begins. We tend to think of career anxiety as something that starts in our early 20s, right? Like around graduation or the first round of job interviews.
The quarter-life crisis.
Yeah, that's the standard narrative. But Juka pushes the timeline way back. He argues that the cognitive damage, the real narrowing of human potential, happens the exact moment a child steps into the standardized education system.
He tackles this by fundamentally redefining this macroeconomic concept of the brain drain.
Right.
Because normally, when economists talk about a brain drain, they're talking about human capital flight. Like a nation's most highly educated, talented individuals, the engineers, the doctors, packing up and moving to Silicon Valley or London for better wages, leaving their home country's economy to stagnate.
Right. the geographical brain drain. That's how we usually hear it.
But Juka says that while that is a real phenomenon, it is just a secondary symptom. The primary brain drain, the really catastrophic, invisible one, isn't about intelligent people crossing borders.
No, it's about what happens to the architecture of a child's mind.
Yeah, when it's forced through the industrial machinery of a one-size-fits-all classroom. He argues that the system systematically drains away innate curiosity, divergent thinking, and individualized talent, and it replaces all of that with a standardized, easily measurable compliance.
And to build this framework, he doesn't just rely on personal anecdotes. He brings in some incredibly heavy intellectual hitters.
He really synthesized a lot
He
here.
does. He pulls from theories by a wide array of educational and economic critics. We're talking about John Taylor Gatto, Michael Sandel, Thomas Piketty, Alfie Kohn, and Peter Turchin.
That is a formidable intellectual matrix to wade through. Let's unpack how these specific theories interlock, starting with John Taylor Gatto.
So Gatto was a deeply disillusioned former New York State Teacher of the Year. He popularized this concept of the hidden curriculum.
The hidden curriculum. I love this concept.
It's so eye-opening. He basically argued that while schools claim to teach math, science, and literature, their actual functional purpose, which they inherited from the 19th century Prussian models of education designed to create compliant factory workers and obedient soldiers, is to teach behavioral conditioning.
So what does this hidden curriculum actually consist of? Because Juka lists out some specific, very damaging hidden subjects that we are all forced to take.
Yeah, according to this synthesis, the first hidden subject is the artificial segmentation of time and knowledge.
Right. The bell rings, and you must immediately stop caring about history and start caring about mathematics.
Exactly, which teaches children that no work is truly worth finishing or getting deeply engrossed in. Your intellectual rhythm is dictated entirely by an external authority.
Which is such a wild way to treat the human brain when you think about it.
Totally. Another hidden subject is class division. Sorting children into advanced, average, and remedial tracks.
Which permanently calcifies their perceived societal value at, like, age 10.
It's brutal. But the most insidious hidden subject Juka points to is the creation of conditional self-esteem.
I want to linger on that for a second, because conditional self-esteem is the engine that powers the treadmill we talked about in the intro.
It really is. And this is where Alfie Kohn's work plays heavily into it. Kohn has spent decades writing about the destructive nature of extrinsic motivation. So, rewards, punishments, and grades.
Basically the carrot and the stick.
Yeah. When a child's entire worth in the system is boiled down to a letter grade or a standardized test score, they learn that their value is entirely dependent on the continuous approval of an authority figure.
They lose their internal locus of control.
Exactly. They don't learn because they're curious anymore. They learn because they are terrified of falling to the bottom of the bell curve.
And this naturally bleeds into Michael Sandel's critique of the tyranny of merit, because Sandel argues that our current meritocracy breeds this toxic hubris among the winners, the kids who get the straight A's and the Ivy League degrees, because they believe their success is entirely their own doing.
They think they earned every single piece of it in a vacuum.
Right. And conversely, it inflicts a deep psychological humiliation on the losers, the ones who internalize the idea that their lower status is proof of their inherent inferiority.
Which brings us to the economic reality that makes this psychological setup so incredibly cruel.
Because it's a rigged game.
It is. Juka layers in Thomas Piketty and Peter Turchin to show that the game is mathematically unwinnable for the vast majority.
Piketty's famous economic formulation, right?
Yeah, that the return on capital generally outpaces overall economic growth, which basically means that inherited wealth and established assets will almost always grow faster than wages earned through hard work.
So the promise that hard work equals financial success is, for most people, a mathematical fiction.
A total fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And Turchin's concept of elite overproduction is the final nail in the coffin here.
Explain elite overproduction, because this blew my mind when I first read it.
So Turchin is a complexity scientist, and he argues that modern societies overproduce highly educated, ambitious individuals compared to the actual number of elite power positions available in the economy.
So the factory of education is churning out thousands of perfectly molded widgets.
Yeah.
And they're all promised a spot at the top of the pyramid. But the pyramid only has room for 10.
Exactly. And this creates massive societal friction, resentment, and a massive surplus of heavily indebted, highly educated young people who feel they have been totally lied to.
Okay, so to crystallize this abstract matrix of theories, Juka gives us this deeply relatable, hypothetical case study.
Right. He introduces us to a character he calls Piku Pekka, or Little Pekka.
And tracking Pekka's journey is vital for you, the listener, because it shows exactly how the real brain drain operates in practice.
So Piku Pekka is designed to be the ultimate statistical median. He's born into a lower middle class family. He's healthy, average height, average weight. On every conceivable metric, he is perfectly normal.
Just a completely average kid.
Right. And he enters the school system having already internalized the background radiation of modern capitalism.
Yeah.
Things like money doesn't grow on trees. And if you put your head down and work hard, anyone can make it.
And the very first thing he learns in the classroom is that hidden curriculum of compliance. He learns to sit quietly, suppress his physical energy, and do exactly what the teacher says.
Yeah. And for the first 9 years of basic education, his brain is subjected to this cram and dump cycle.
Ugh, the cram and dump. We all remember that.
It's the worst. He spends hours memorizing isolated facts, the dates of obscure battles, the exact chemical weight of an element, because the system demands it for an impending test.
But because these facts are completely divorced from any practical application or broader meaning in his actual life, his brain just efficiently deletes the information the moment the 2-minute exam is over.
It's an incredibly inefficient use of human cognitive bandwidth.
But here is where the tragedy of the brain drain really manifests. Because Pekka isn't actually a blank slate. He has a profound innate talent.
He really does.
As a child, he loved working with his hands. He was the kid taking apart the toaster to see how the springs worked. He loved building things, fixing bicycles, understanding physical mechanics. He has a genuine natural aptitude for practical, tactile engineering.
But the societal feedback loop, the subtle and not so subtle messaging from the educational hierarchy, tells him that working with your hands is a secondary path.
It's what you do if you aren't smart enough to go to university.
Right. The system signals that prestige, safety, and societal respect only come from a high-level academic degree. So, driven by that conditional self-esteem we discussed, Pekka actively ignores his natural talents.
He suppresses the very thing that gives him intrinsic joy and a flow state.
He essentially performs a lobotomy on his own potential just to fit the mold.
And that right there is the real brain drain.
Exactly. He sacrifices his unique mechanical aptitude to become a mediocre academic. He pushes through upper secondary school, crams more ephemeral information, and manages to scrape together grades just good enough to pass the entrance exams for a University of Applied Sciences.
And when it comes time to pick a major, he doesn't look inward. He looks outward.
Yeah, he chooses a degree based on what the media and the government are currently touting as a trendy or high-demand field.
Even if that field is a completely manufactured bubble.
Which it usually is.
Oh.
He picks a flashy corporate sector, grinds through the coursework with strictly average marks, and finally graduates. He steps off the graduation stage, piece of paper in hand, fully expecting the world to hand him the bright, secure future he was promised.
He played by the rules. He stayed on the treadmill.
But the reality waiting for him is catastrophic. Because of macroeconomic forces he was never taught to understand, like globalization and automation. The actual domestic jobs in his chosen trendy field were outsourced to cheaper labor markets 3 years before he even graduated.
Ouch. And furthermore, because he's a statistical average and comes from a lower middle class background, he lacks the one thing that actually circumvents the meritocratic bottleneck.
Generational networking.
Yep. He doesn't have an uncle at a law firm or a family friend in venture capital. He is staring at the raw, unfiltered job market.
And because he spent his life being molded into a generalist widget, he has no specialized, undeniable skill to fall back on.
Right. He can't get a job abroad because he's not an elite talent in his field.
So he ends up sitting in the sterile waiting room of the unemployment office, staring at a bulletin board where the only thing available is a predatory 0-hour contract doing outbound telemarketing for a product he doesn't even care about.
And this is where the psychological trap snaps shut. How does Pekka process this failure?
You have to remember Michael Sandel's tyranny of merit here.
Right. The system spent 2 decades explicitly promising Pekka that hard work guarantees success.
Therefore, when Pekka fails to secure a dignified livelihood, he doesn't blame globalization. He doesn't blame elite overproduction. He looks in the mirror and internalizes the belief that there is something fundamentally, intrinsically defective about him.
That is an incredibly heavy psychological burden. It's not just that he is poor, it's that society has convinced him he deserves to be poor.
It's devastating.
And I see how this flows perfectly into Juka's broader analysis. Because if the math of elite overproduction guarantees that a massive percentage of the population will end up like Pekka, essentially discarded by the system, how does society prevent a mass psychological breakdown or a total revolt?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why do we continue to blame the individual when the system is so transparently saturated?
To answer that, Juka forces us to look at the ideological bedrock of the West, the absolute unyielding myth of pure meritocracy, and the way both major political factions manipulate this myth to their own ends.
Which brings us to a concept Juka explores deeply, which he terms destructive empathy. But let's break down the mechanics of this meritocratic trap first. We touched on it with Sandel, but Juka really zeroes in on how it operates in moments of extreme crisis.
Yeah, Juka paints a highly visceral picture of what happens when the chaos of real life intersects with the rigid expectations of a meritocratic society.
The bad week hypothetical.
Right. He says, imagine a truly catastrophic, cascading failure of a week.
Like a week from hell.
Exactly. On Monday, your company undergoes a private equity buyout and your department is liquidated so you lose your job.
Okay, terrible Monday.
On Tuesday, you go to the doctor for a lingering cough and receive a severe chronic medical diagnosis. On Wednesday, an electrical fault burns your apartment to the ground.
Grief.
On Thursday, your identity is stolen in a massive corporate data breach and your bank freezes your remaining assets. And then on Friday, you literally trip and break your arm on the steps of the local social services office while trying to get emergency help.
I mean, it's a biblical level of bad luck, just a complete collapse of external stability.
Right. And Juka asks, under a strict meritocratic framework, how does society silently view you in that moment?
And the implicit, horrifying answer is that society views you with suspicion.
Total suspicion.
Because if we culturally worship the idea that success is entirely a product of individual choices, effort, and moral virtue, then the dark mirror of that philosophy is that catastrophic failure must also be the result of your own poor choices, lack of effort, or moral failing.
It's a defense mechanism for the winners.
Exactly. If they admit that random chance, systemic fragility, or just bad luck can destroy a life in 5 days, they have to admit their own success is fragile. So they blame the victim to maintain the illusion of control.
The meritocracy leaves absolutely no ideological room for the random chaos of the universe.
Not at all.
And Juka emphasizes that this philosophical blame game is playing out against the backdrop of an incredibly hostile mathematical reality. He cites the crushing statistics of the modern job market situations, where you have hundreds of applicants aggressively filtering through automated ATS software for a single entry-level position.
Not to mention the compounding global traumas that young people are trying to process simultaneously.
Yeah, Juka points out that this generation isn't just dealing with a tight job market.
Right. They are carrying the lingering, unprocessed psychological fragmentation of a global pandemic alongside the pervasive, low-level hum of existential climate dread.
It's a lot to carry. And this is where Juka turns his analytical sights on the political spectrum. He asks, how do our political institutions respond to this massive structural pressure cooker?
And true to his anarchist roots, he finds both the political right and the political left to be complicit.
Acting as two sides of the same destructive coin. Let's look at his critique of the right first.
Right. And just as a quick reminder to you listening, we are unpacking his perspective here to understand his underlying logic. We are not endorsing a political hit on either side. So how does Juka deconstruct the right-wing response to Pekka's situation?
Well, Juka attacks the right for aggressively pushing this ruthless, hyper-competitive version of meritocracy.
Okay.
He argues that right-wing economic ideology functions essentially as social Darwinism mediated through capital.
That's a strong phrase.
It is. It's a system specifically designed to funnel immense wealth, resources, and regulatory capture upward to massive corporate entities, while simultaneously deploying a moralistic narrative that tells the individuals crushed at the bottom that they simply weren't fit enough to survive.
It's the ultimate weaponization of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative.
Exactly.
If you didn't succeed, you didn't pull hard enough, completely ignoring the fact that you might not even own boots.
Precisely. He views it as a cruel, mathematically rigged game that uses the language of personal responsibility as a smokescreen for systemic exploitation.
But, and this is where his critique becomes deeply unorthodox, he then pivots and launches an equally blistering attack on the political left for their response.
Right, which he categorizes under the umbrella of destructive empathy?
Destructive empathy. That phrase immediately jumps out because it feels like an oxymoron. Empathy is universally framed as a positive, pro-social trait. So how does Juka argue that empathy becomes destructive?
In Jaco's systems analysis, empathy becomes destructive when it transitions from supporting an individual to infantilizing them.
Infantilizing them.
Yeah. He argues that the modern institutional left tends to view anyone struggling against the system as a permanent, helpless victim. And the proposed solution is always to coddle them, to wrap them in bureaucratic bubble wrap, and to continuously rescue them using state apparatuses and redistributed tax money.
But wait, if Juka acknowledges that the system is brutally rigged against people like Pekka, wouldn't a robust social safety net be the exact thing Pekka needs? Like, why is providing assistance seen as infantilizing?
It's not the assistance itself, it's the psychological framing of the assistance.
Oh, okay.
Juka posits that if you culturally encode a generation of children with the belief that they are fundamentally fragile, that they are perpetual victims of inescapable macro circumstances, and that their only hope for survival is to remain completely dependent on the benevolence of the state, well, they will never develop internal resilience.
They will never grow into capable, sovereign, independent adults.
Right. You're replacing the cruelty of corporate exploitation with the suffocating, paralyzing embrace of state dependency. Learned helplessness becomes institutionalized.
That is a fascinating tension. So if we look at the board from Juka's perspective,
Yeah.
he rejects the right-wing bootstraps mentality because it's cruel, ignores systemic reality, and blames the victim.
Yes.
But he also rejects the left-wing state rescue mentality because it strips the individual of agency and breeds learned helplessness.
Exactly.
So where does that leave us? How does a person actually operate in the world? Where does personal responsibility fit into a philosophy that explicitly acknowledges the game is rigged?
That is the crux of his entire philosophy.
Yeah.
Juka advocates for a radical reclamation of personal responsibility, but one that is surgically decoupled from societal guilt.
Decoupled from guilt, how does one actually do that in practice?
It requires a two-step cognitive shift. Step one, you must look at the board clearly and acknowledge the rigging.
Okay, so seeing the matrix.
Right. Juka explicitly states that luck, your genetic lottery, your geographic starting position, the amount of silver spoons in your mouth, and systemic economic corruption play massive, undeniable roles in your outcomes. You must accept that the meritocracy is largely a fiction.
And paradoxically, accepting that the system is unfair is what sets you free. Because once you deeply realize the treadmill is programmed to throw you off, you stop internalizing the fall as a personal moral failure.
Exactly. You shed the paralyzing guilt. You drop the psychic weight of the system's expectations. But, and this is the vital step too, you do not replace that dropped guilt with victimhood. You don't sit on the floor and wait for the government to carry you.
Okay, so you don't just give up.
No. Instead, you refocus your locus of control locally. You realize that while you cannot control the macroeconomic weather, you are entirely responsible for building your own shelter.
I like that. Building your own shelter.
You stop seeking validation by climbing a corporate ladder, and you stop seeking salvation from state bureaucracy. You take absolute responsibility for yourself and your immediate localized community.
You essentially secede from the psychological rat race, even if you are still physically living within the economy.
That's a great way to put it.
Which brings us to a massive point of societal friction. Because if individuals like Pekka actually start realizing this, if they shed the guilt, reject the victimhood, and just quietly step off the treadmill to build their own lives, the system doesn't just ignore them.
Oh, definitely not.
It actively attacks them. The overarching narrative needs them to either be striving or suffering. It cannot tolerate peaceful opting out.
It really can't.
And this transitions us beautifully into Juka's analysis of how the broader culture enforces compliance. He calls it ideological unemployment, and he deeply dissects the media outrage machine that surrounds it.
Yes, Juka devotes a significant portion of his analysis to understanding the cultural immune response to people who refuse to play the game.
The cultural immune response.
Yeah, he looks at how the mainstream media weaponizes alternative lifestyles. He points to very specific cases that ignited firestorms in the Finnish media landscape, focusing on individuals named Alma Tuva and a 24-year-old named Joel from Kuopio.
What were the specifics of Joel and Alma's situations? Like, why did they become cultural flashpoints?
They were young individuals who had essentially arrived at Juka's conclusion. They looked at the job market, looked at the stress, looked at the demands of modern consumerism, and decided to opt out.
Good for them.
Yeah. They chose to live very simply on minimal income, prioritizing their time, mental health, and artistic pursuits over traditional career advancement.
But Juka isn't just interested in their choices, is he? He is deeply interested in the algorithmic imperative of how the media framed those choices.
Right, because the media didn't present this as a sociological study on alternative living.
No, they presented it as a moral outrage.
Exactly. The articles were engineered for maximum friction. They utilized highly inflammatory, surgically crafted clickbait headlines. A headline wouldn't say, "Young man finds peace living on a budget."
Of course not. That doesn't get clicks.
The headline would read, "Joel is proudly unemployed." Or it would heavily emphasize that these individuals are actively, maliciously refusing to work.
It's a deliberate framing designed to trigger a specific demographic. They are presenting Joel not as someone making a personal choice, but as a parasite actively draining the lifeblood of the hardworking taxpayer.
That is precisely the psychological trigger. Juka argues that the media intentionally uses these narratives as a closed-loop algorithmic pressure valve to stoke public anger, drive engagement, and generate ad revenue.
And he proves it by dissecting the comment sections of these articles,
Oh, comment sections.
which he notes are completely, shockingly devoid of any baseline human empathy.
The comment sections are the absolute darkest timeline of human discourse.
So what specific psychology does Juka identify in the vitriol directed at Joel and Alma?
He identifies a deeply ingrained, almost pathological mindset of generational resentment. He actually parodies the classic commenter trope, which, transcends borders but has a very specific flavor in Finland.
Oh, let's hear the parody.
It's the person aggressively typing. "When I was young, I walked to school uphill both ways, through a blizzard, barefoot. I started doing manual labor on a logging site when I was still in diapers, and I worked my way up to 3 master's degrees. Kids today are just soft. They have absolutely no sisu."
Ah, sisu. That is the legendary Finnish cultural concept of stoic determination, grit, and bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. It's usually associated with the Winter War and extreme resilience.
Yes. But Juka points out how these commenters are fundamentally weaponizing the concept of sisu.
Weaponizing grit.
They are taking their own perceived past hardships, which are almost always wildly romanticized or exaggerated by memory, and using them as a cudgel to invalidate the very real, very different structural struggles of the youth today.
They aren't offering guidance, they're demanding that the younger generations suffer equally.
Exactly. They argue vehemently that unemployment benefits should be slashed to zero, asserting that the economy demands blood, and everyone must bleed their fair share.
But the brilliance of Juka's analysis here is that he exposes how these angry commenters are actually falling for a systemic misdirection.
Completely falling for it.
They are being manipulated by the editors.
Completely manipulated. Juka notes that if you actually have the patience to read past the incendiary headline in the rage bait opening paragraph, the real human nuance of Joel and Alma's lives is usually buried in paragraph 12.
Way down at the bottom.
Deep in the text, you discover that they aren't just lying on the couch staring at the ceiling. They're often artists, community volunteers, or individuals actively recovering from severe burnout. They're seeking a sustainable way to exist free of manufactured, crushing expectations.
They're experimenting with new ways to live.
But the media strategically buries that context, relying on the statistical certainty that most readers will only consume the headline, feel a surge of cortisol and righteous anger, and immediately scroll down to attack each other in the comments.
It is a masterful misdirection. I mean, it's not just throwing raw meat to lions. It's like the architects of a failing, underfunded zoo deliberately causing a riot in the monkey enclosure. So the public gets entirely distracted watching the monkeys fight each other and completely forgets to look up and ask why the zoo directors are embezzling all the ticket money.
That is a phenomenal analogy for the macroeconomic reality Juka is highlighting. He claims this media strategy of pitting the working class against the unemployed is a deliberate smokescreen to hide a deeply painful structural truth about our society.
Which is what?
That our financial valuation of human labor is completely absurdly inverted.
Let's dig into that inversion, because we are taught that compensation reflects value. How does Juka break down the math of this warped valuation?
He uses a stark, undeniable comparison. He points out that an investment banker, whose primary societal function is moving abstract algorithms of capital around on a digital screen to extract marginal fractional profits.
Yeah.
That banker can easily make more money in a single Tuesday afternoon than a person relying on the social safety net makes in an entire year.
And the disparity is even more glaring when you look at actual physical labor.
Exactly. Look at the essential blue-collar workforce,
Mm.
the people who actually sustain the physical reality of society.
The sanitation workers who prevent disease.
Right. The plumbers who maintain clean water, the agricultural workers who harvest the calories we need to survive. These individuals are systematically undervalued, chronically underpaid, and often culturally treated as intellectually inferior compared to celebrities, influencers, or corporate consultants.
Whose primary economic function is basically to provide circus entertainment or abstract administrative bloat.
It really is a digital age manifestation of the Roman bread and circuses.
But we've outsourced the bread making to the lowest bidder and vastly overpaid the clowns in the circus.
That's exactly it. It's a total hierarchy of false value. The people performing the most vital, life-sustaining work are compensated the least, while those positioned closest to the artificial flow of fiat capital are compensated the most.
So when you view the economy through this lens, when you see that the game is not only rigged but fundamentally absurd, Juka doesn't condemn people like Alma and Joel.
He doesn't think they lack sisu at all. He actually openly praises them.
He raises a metaphorical glass to them for having the clarity and the courage to do what feels right to their own souls, instead of bowing to a societal pressure that has lost all connection to actual human value.
Which is an incredibly radical stance. He is explicitly praising ideological unemployment.
But within his systemic framework, it is the only logical move. If the casino is rigged, the only way to win is to walk out the front door.
Right.
Which leads us to a fascinating, massive macroeconomic hypothetical. If the current system requires this constant manufactured media outrage to keep us distracted and running on the treadmill, what happens if we actually alter the baseline mechanics of survival?
Oh, this is the big one.
What happens if we give people the breathing room to step back, catch their breath, and actually look at the machinery around them? This brings us to a highly debated economic concept, universal basic income, and the profound fear it strikes into the heart of the establishment.
Yes. This is where Juka connects his critique of micro-level career pressure to macro-level economic theory. He explores the concept of universal basic income, or UBI.
Now, for those familiar with the general discourse, UBI is typically framed as a mechanical economic fix-like, a way to eradicate extreme poverty, simplify the welfare state, or cushion the inevitable blow of mass AI automation displacing white-collar jobs.
Right. And the standard arguments against UBI are usually purely fiscal.
Yeah, I mean, if you give everyone unconditional money to cover their baseline survival needs, food, shelter, basic utilities, doesn't that just trigger massive hyperinflation?
Don't landlords just raise the rent by the exact amount of the UBI stipend, neutralizing the benefit entirely?
Those are the standard macroeconomic debates, but Juka bypasses the fiscal mechanics entirely, doesn't he?
Completely bypasses them. He is interested in the sociological and cognitive implications. He posits a highly provocative theory regarding why UBI faces such fierce, entrenched, almost visceral opposition from the ruling class, the political and corporate elite.
Okay.
He argues that the establishment isn't primarily terrified of the tax implications or inflation. They're terrified of something much more fundamental. They're terrified of giving the average person significant unallocated free time.
They are afraid of time. Why? What is so dangerous about an empty calendar?
Because free time equates to cognitive bandwidth. And cognitive bandwidth gives people the opportunity to think.
To think. Just the pure act of contemplation is viewed as a systemic threat.
Absolutely. Think about the physiological reality of the treadmill. When you are working 50 to 60 hours a week across 2 precarious gig economy jobs just to pay exorbitant rent and buy increasingly expensive groceries.
Your brain is locked in a constant state of sympathetic nervous system arousal.
Yes, you are in fight-or-flight survival mode. 100% of your cognitive bandwidth is consumed by immediate, short-term crisis management. How do I pay the electric bill? How do I fix the car?
You literally do not have the surplus mental energy required to step back, analyze the macroeconomic structures governing your life, and question the legitimacy of the system.
Exactly. You're too tired to rebel.
Oh, wow. So the argument here is that the artificial scarcity of time and energy, the forced, relentless labor of modern capitalism, isn't just an unfortunate byproduct of economic output. It is an active, necessary mechanism of social control.
That is precisely his argument. Exhaustion is compliance.
Exhaustion is compliance. That's a chilling thought.
If you keep the population perpetually tired, chronically anxious, and fighting each other in the comment sections over manufactured cultural wedge issues, they will never look up at the architecture of the cage.
Right.
Juka suggests that an independently thinking populace, suddenly freed from the immediate paralyzing panic of starvation and homelessness by a UBI, well, they might sit down, take a deep breath, look around, and collectively realize that they don't actually need the ruling class at all.
This challenges a massive assumption about human nature, because the counterargument, the narrative we are spoon-fed from birth, is a very Hobbesian view of humanity.
Very dark view.
We are told that pressure creates diamonds. We are told that without the imminent threat of poverty, without the terrifying stick of eviction hovering over our heads, human beings would default to pure hedonism and laziness.
Right, the idea that fear is the only reliable engine of progress.
But Juka completely rejects that premise, doesn't he?
He rejects it entirely, and this reveals the deeply optimistic core of his anarchist philosophy. Juka's foundational belief is that humanity is not inherently lazy.
We're really not.
We are naturally curious, inherently productive, and biologically driven to create and cooperate. Think back to the story of Pico Pekka. As a child, Pekka didn't need the threat of starvation to want to build things, fix bicycles, and understand mechanics.
That desire was innate. It was intrinsic.
It was only when the system attached conditional anxiety to learning that his natural drive was crushed.
Exactly. Juka argues that the current hypercapitalist framework actually stifles true innovation because it forces human potential only into highly competitive, aggressively profit-driven avenues.
In the current system, you don't invent a product to genuinely solve a human problem. You invent a product, often with planned obsolescence, to capture market share and generate quarterly returns for shareholders.
But if you remove that artificial survival threat,
If you remove the threat via something like UBI, Juka believes you wouldn't get a society of apathetic couch potatoes. You would witness the greatest unlocking of passion-driven human potential in history.
that is quite the claim. But think about it. If people didn't have to monetize every waking second of their existence just to survive, they would start creating solutions that benefit the collective rather than just enriching a corporation.
They would write books, they would build open-source software, they would care for their aging neighbors, they would invent sustainable agricultural technologies.
They would work incredibly hard, but they would work on things that actually matter.
It is a profoundly beautiful utopian vision of human capacity. But as a listener absorbing this, it also presents a massive practical dilemma.
Because we don't have UBI right now.
Exactly. Because right now, today, we don't live in a UBI society. We live in the reality of the treadmill. The rent is still due on the first of the month.
Yeah, the bills don't stop.
So understanding all this systemic pressure, recognizing the manipulation of the media, and seeing the trap of the meritocracy, how does an individual actually apply Juka's philosophy to survive today? How do you escape the rat race and find fulfilling work in the deeply flawed world as it currently exists? This brings us to the core of Juka's actionable advice: how to actually find work you love without starving in the process.
Let's get into it.
This is where Juka transitions from a macro-societal critic to a micro-level philosophical guide. He offers a very specific psychological framework for reprogramming how we view success, motivation, and sequence.
And the foundational pillar of this reprogramming is what he calls the if-then versus the when-then flip.
The if-then script. This is the operating code of the treadmill we've been talking about. Let's break down how this script infects our decision-making.
Society conditions us from childhood to operate on conditional, delayed happiness. It's a very rigid, sequential script. If I sacrifice my current joy to get a good education, and if I secure a high-paying, prestigious job, and if I save enough money for 40 years...
Then finally, during retirement, I will be allowed to be happy.
Right. The reward is always dangled at the very end of a long, dark, miserable tunnel of compliance.
Which fundamentally implies that the journey itself, the actual living of your daily life, is supposed to be an unpleasant sacrifice. You endure the present strictly to purchase a hypothetical future.
It turns life into an endurance test.
Precisely. But Juka argues this cognitive sequence is completely fundamentally backward. And it's why so many successful people hit midlife and experience a profound crisis of meaning.
The midlife crisis.
Yeah. They reach the then and realize the happiness isn't there because they never actually practiced feeling it. Juka says the true secret to a resilient, fulfilling life is flipping the script too. When I am happy, when I'm engaged in doing something I genuinely love, then my motivation becomes limitless. I naturally learn the skills I need, and the livelihood will eventually follow.
Joy isn't the final destination you drag yourself toward. Joy is the fuel you put in the tank at the starting line.
Yes, but, and Juka acknowledges a massive roadblock here, To even get to that starting line, to even permit yourself to pursue joy, you need a baseline level of self-efficacy.
And as we discussed with Little Pekka, the school system and the brutal job market have likely crushed the listener's self-esteem.
If you've been laid off twice and rejected by 50 automated resume scanners, you probably don't feel capable of forging a new, passion-driven path.
So how does he suggest we repair that foundational self-belief? Because telling someone who is deeply burned out to just follow your joy can feel incredibly hollow, almost insulting.
It can, which is why Juka provides a very grounded, almost anthropological mental exercise. He doesn't offer empty affirmations.
What does he offer?
He tells the reader to look at their hidden massive achievements.
Hidden massive achievements. I love that.
Yeah, the monumental victories you pull off every day that you have completely automated and taken for granted.
He uses some brilliant, universally applicable examples for this.
He does. He says, look at something as basic as walking. Think about the staggering neurological and biomechanical complexity required for bipedal movement.
It's basically a controlled forward fall.
Right. Think about the years of relentless trial, error, pain, falling down, smacking your head on the coffee table, and getting back up that it took for you as a toddler to master balance and gravity. You didn't quit because you failed a walking test. You persisted.
And he points to language acquisition, right?
Yes. He specifically mentions that if you are reading his blog, which is written in Finnish, you have successfully mastered one of the most notoriously complex, syntactically difficult languages on planet Earth.
It's so true. We completely forget the sheer willpower and immense cognitive processing it took to acquire these baseline human skills simply because they are now subconscious.
But forcing yourself to recognize that past effort proves a vital point. You are inherently a learning machine. You possess a staggering capacity for perseverance when the goal is internally motivated.
That is exactly the intended takeaway. The exercise is designed to remind you that you are not defective. You are highly capable of mastering incredibly difficult systems when you are naturally driven.
So once you have reestablished that baseline confidence in your own machinery, the next obvious question is direction.
Right. Where do you aim that machinery? How do you actually identify your true passion when your brain is cluttered with corporate expectations?
Jika offers a beautifully simple, elegant formula for cutting through the noise.
What is the formula to find the signal?
He says, look closely at what you consistently do for your friends, completely for free.
Wow. That bypasses the entire concept of the resume, doesn't it?
It shatters the corporate blinders entirely. He says, forget your official job title. Forget the degree you went into debt for. Observe your actual behavior.
What do people in your life naturally gravitate toward you for?
Exactly. When crises happen or when projects need doing, what do they ask you to help with, regardless of whether you are being compensated?
Do your friends constantly call you to help troubleshoot their broken computers?
Are you the person everyone relies on to meticulously plan the logistics of group travel?
Are you the one people call at 2 a.m. to mediate deeply emotional arguments between partners?
Yes. So if we apply this, if you are the person everyone calls when they're going through a tough time because you have a knack for de-escalating conflict and offering perspective,
maybe your true passion isn't the Excel spreadsheets you stare at for 40 hours a week as a mid-level logistics manager.
exactly. Maybe your inherent genius lies in human connection, counseling, or mediation.
How?
You have literally been doing the work successfully for years. You just haven't recognized it as valid work because a corporation hasn't assigned a payroll number to it.
You have been generating immense value just outside the framework of fiat currency.
And that realization leads to the final and undeniably most terrifying step in his framework. Once you identify that core competency, that thing you joyfully do for free, your primary mission in life is to figure out how to transition that specific value creation into your livelihood.
Okay, but I have to push back here, or at least voice the anxiety of the listener. Because identifying the passion is one thing, but making the leap from, I give good advice to my friends, to, I am going to abandon my salary and try to survive in a rigged capitalist system doing this, is terrifying.
It's deeply terrifying.
How does Juka address the sheer risk of stepping off the economic safety mat?
He addresses it by redefining what a safety net actually consists of. This connects back to his overarching anarchist philosophy regarding community versus the state.
Okay, how so?
When you are engaged in doing what you genuinely love, you operate with authenticity. And when you are authentic and providing real value, you naturally attract and build a supportive tribe of like-minded individuals.
A tribe.
And Juka makes a blunt, profound economic observation. You can't eat money.
Meaning that currency is just an abstraction of value, and in a true crisis, the abstraction becomes worthless.
Precisely. If the macroeconomic system crashes, if hyperinflation hits, or if the banking infrastructure fails, the digital numbers in your bank account will not keep you warm.
No, they won't.
True, resilient security doesn't come from a fancy VP job title or a piece of paper signed by a university chancellor. True security is derived horizontally from your community. Your tribe is your actual safety net.
So if you are the person in your community who enthusiastically fixes everyone's cars, or grows the food, or mediates the conflicts, and the formal economy collapses, your community will ensure you do not starve because your skills are vital to their collective survival.
Exactly. Building a livelihood out of genuine passion inherently weaves the localized social safety net that the distant bureaucratic state is currently failing to provide.
That is a deeply empowering, almost tribal way to reframe career trajectory. It's not about climbing a vertical, fragile ladder. It's about weaving a dense, horizontal web of human connection and mutual reliance through your passions.
It's beautiful, really.
But as beautiful as that macro vision is, building that tribe takes time. Transitioning your life takes time. What about tomorrow morning? What about the mundane, day-to-day grind while you are still trapped in the cubicle trying to build this new life on the side?
Well, Juka doesn't leave a hanging there either.
Yeah.
He provides a highly tactical, neurobiologically grounded method for getting things done.
Which brings us to section 6, the dopamine hack for daily motivation. Let's get into the brain chemistry.
Yes, this is where Juka's background as an engineer really shines. He isn't just dealing in abstract sociology, he understands the mechanical operation of the human nervous system.
He knows that cognitive state dictates performance.
Being in a positive, motivated state of mind significantly, measurably lowers the friction required to execute complex tasks.
I mean, we all intuitively know that. You write better, you code better, you problem solve faster when you are in a good mood compared to when you are depressed or anxious.
But the tragedy is that the way we traditionally structure our daily work habits actively prevents us from accessing that state. As we discussed with the if-then script, we have culturally adopted a strict reward-after-work system.
Suffer first, enjoy later.
Right. You force yourself to sit down and grind through the hard, agonizing, unpleasant task using sheer discipline. And only after the suffering is complete do you allow yourself the treat.
You finish the grueling report, then you are allowed to drink the good coffee. You survive 5 miserable days in the office. Then you are granted the fleeting joy of the weekend.
It is the absolute embodiment of the Protestant work ethic, the belief that suffering must precede salvation.
But from a purely neurobiological perspective, Juka argues that this approach is incredibly inefficient.
It completely misunderstands how dopamine works. Dopamine isn't just a pleasure chemical that you get as a reward. It is a neuromodulator of anticipation and motivation. It is the chemical that lowers the activation energy required to initiate an action.
So Juka suggests a dopamine hack. He says we need to completely, radically reverse the chronological order of our work habits. You must reward yourself before you start the difficult task.
You have to prime the neurological pump.
Prime the pump, yes.
Prime your brain with dopamine first. Engage in an activity that brings you genuine, uncomplicated joy, laughter, or physical satisfaction before you sit down to do the heavy lifting.
By voluntarily putting your brain into a positive, dopamine-rich state, you lower the neurological friction.
You will perform the subsequent work much more efficiently, with higher creativity, and you will burn significantly less willpower in the process.
He illustrates this concept in the text with a really funny, somewhat absurd analogy involving a pediatrician's office.
It's a brilliant subversion of our norms. He says, consider the standard operating procedure when we take a child to the doctor for a painful procedure.
Okay.
The child is terrified in the waiting room, their cortisol is spiking, they go in, they get the painful shot, they scream, they cry. And then, only after the trauma is fully concluded, the doctor hands them a lollipop as a reward for having endured the suffering.
The classic post-shot lollipop.
Exactly. But Juka suggests that if the actual goal is to ensure the medical procedure is performed with maximum efficiency, steady hands, and high performance, maybe we should be giving the doctor the lollipop right before the appointment begins.
Okay, that visual is hilarious. The idea of a surgeon intensely sucking on a cherry lollipop to get a dopamine hit before picking up a scalpel is absurd, but neurochemically, the logic is absolutely airtight.
It really is.
It feels so transgressive. It feels like we are violating the fundamental unspoken rules of adulthood to say, I am going to intentionally eat my dessert before I even look at my vegetables.
It's totally reversing the order we were taught.
But if you think about it like an engine, you are essentially filling up the car's gas tank before you start the grueling road trip instead of trying to physically push the empty car to the destination using brute strength and then filling the tank as a reward for arriving.
That is the perfect mechanical analogy. Pushing the car is relying on discipline and cortisol. Driving the car is relying on dopamine and joy.
And this tactical hack ties his entire macro philosophy together beautifully. Joy and happiness shouldn't be the distant, highly conditional, heavily taxed reward dangling at the very end of a miserable 30-year stint on the corporate treadmill.
No, joy is the required fuel. Joy is the mechanism that makes the meaningful work happen in the first place.
If you're constantly running on empty, relying purely on the fear of failure and the panic of poverty to motivate you, you will inevitably burn out. Your engine will seize and you will fall off the treadmill.
But if you learn to run on the intrinsic dopamine of genuine passion, supported by upfront neurological rewards, the journey itself becomes self-sustaining.
Which brings this entire massive exploration full circle. As we move toward the outro, let's take a moment to look back at the incredible winding journey we've just taken through the landscape of Juka's Hashataskuplia.
It's been quite a ride.
We started by deconstructing the tragic, systemic trap of Little Pekka, revealing how the factory of modern education deliberately grinds down innate human passion, replacing it with the fragile, easily manipulated construct of conditional, test-based self-worth.
We then explored the cruel mathematical illusion of modern meritocracy, dissecting how it isolates individuals, forcing them to internalize massive systemic failures as personal moral flaws.
And we saw how this trap is maintained by both the hyper-competitive social Darwinism of the right and the infantilizing, destructive empathy of the left.
We navigated the algorithmic media outrage machine, understanding how it deliberately weaponizes nostalgia and concepts like Sisu to pit the working class against those who opt out.
Effectively distracting us from the absurd reality that our economic valuation of labor is entirely backward.
We touched on the profound, unspoken fear the establishment has of a population granted enough free time to think critically, and how concepts like universal basic income could theoretically unleash an unprecedented wave of intrinsic, passion-driven human innovation.
And finally, we landed on the practical tools for personal salvation in a rigged game. Flipping the cultural if-then script to when-then, hacking our own neurobiology by rewarding ourselves first to lower task friction.
And discovering our true community-building livelihood by relentlessly examining what we joyfully do for free.
It is a breathtakingly comprehensive deconstruction of modern existence.
It truly is.
And I want to emphasize to you, listening to this deep dive, while Juka paints an undeniably bleak, almost dystopian picture of the macroeconomic structures and the bureaucratic institutions surrounding us, his ultimate foundational message is not one of despair.
Not at all. It is deeply, profoundly empowering.
Because after tearing down the illusions of the system, he ultimately returns all the power and agency back to the individual.
Yes, his core message is a declaration of independence.
Your inherent value as a human being is not determined by your economic productivity. Your worth is not calculated by your job title, your university grades, or your ability to neatly fit the mold of an obedient corporate widget.
You have absolute, unconditional permission to step off the track.
You have permission to stop running until your lungs bleed on a treadmill that was explicitly designed to exhaust you.
And as we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with a final thought, drawn from a very brief, almost throwaway detail tucked into the very end of Juka's writing.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about.
It's a detail that takes this intensely personal conversation and expands it back out into something massive.
What is the detail?
After laying out his localized advice to do what you love and build your immediate tribe, Juka briefly zooms out. He mentions that fully fixing the overarching macroeconomic system specifically, he explicitly calls out the global fractional reserve banking system that creates fiat money out of thin air.
Right.
He says that fixing that is, in his understated words, not quite a tomorrow thing.
A profound understatement. Dismantling and rebuilding the entire global financial architecture might take until at least Wednesday afternoon.
Right. He acknowledges the sheer, immovable immensity of the systemic problem. He knows we can't vote away the global financial order overnight.
So what's the takeaway?
That sober acknowledgement leaves us with an incredibly profound, highly practical challenge for you to ponder this week. If we accept the reality that we cannot fix the massive, entrenched global financial system tomorrow, what is one small, tangible way you can start trading your time, your energy, and your unique skills outside of traditional fiat currency today?
Oh, that is a fascinating prompt.
How can you start actively building your localized tribe this week? Think about it. If the digital numbers in your bank account vanish tomorrow, what undeniable physical or emotional value do you bring to the people immediately around you?
And conversely, who are the people whose skills you would intimately rely on for survival and joy?
Cultivating that network, that voluntary, non-monetary exchange of passion, skill, and mutual aid, is the ultimate, quiet act of rebellion against the treadmill.
I love that framing. It's not about waiting for a revolution to burn the corrupted system to the ground. It's about quietly, joyfully building a better, more resilient system in your own backyard starting today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It has been a truly thought-provoking, paradigm-shifting journey to unpack.
It absolutely has. We hope this extensive exploration of Hajatuscuplia has given you substantial food for thought, perhaps validated some of the deep, inexplicable exhaustion you've been feeling, and offered a concrete new framework for thinking about your own vast potential.
Just remember, the machine only works if you agree to participate.
Exactly. So the next time you feel the speed on that societal treadmill creeping up, the next time the incline gets agonizingly steeper and the invisible crowd on the sidelines starts demanding more of your soul, you don't have to keep running. You possess the power to reach out, hit the emergency stop button, step off the belt, and decide to go for a quiet, meaningful walk in the woods instead. Keep questioning the algorithms around you. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.